Here is the promised tutorial on making the Clark character from the 3D animation class at Dixie State University. So to start off with, I've got a blank scene here. If you want, you can watch in the bottom right corner here. My keys will show up if I left click, for instance, or if I rotate something, then it'll show what I'm using on my keyboard and on my mouse down there in the bottom right. So I'm going to start off by deleting my default cube, and I'm going to tap 5 on the number pad and then 1 on the number pad to go into a front orthographic view. 5 makes my view orthographic, meaning no perspective distortion, and 1 on the number pad takes me to a front view, which means, of course, that if I were to start rotating things, for instance, they would only rotate along the y-axis unless I specified on the keyboard, and if I were to move something, it would only move in x and z, for instance. So basically it just limits me to 2 axes, which allows me to kind of work 2-dimensionally in my 3-dimensional space, which is nice. So first of all, we're going to bring in some reference images, the reference artwork that we got from class today. So I'm going to click on Add, Image, Reference, and when I bring this in, it's going to be facing my point of view exactly. So that's important because well, that's why it's important for me to be in a front orthographic view. If I tumble my view now, you can see that this could be facing kind of a little off if I'd started, from a non-named viewport. We decided in class that we're going to flip this around to model the other side of the front view of our character. So I'm going to scale this in the x-axis, which is left and right here. So SX -1, enter. And that will scale it in the x-axis for me. I'm now going to make it a little bit transparent, so this image icon down here, I'm going to click on that while I have the image selected and check Use Alpha so that it has transparency, and then I'm going to bring the transparency down to about 0.5%, about 50% see-through. And from there I can tap GX on the keyboard and line this thing up pretty evenly with my vertical midpoint of my scene. Okay, so there's one view. Now let's tap 3 on the number pad to go to a right orthographic viewport, and we'll do the same thing again. Instead of the Add menu, this time I'm going to use Shift A, and same menu pops up. I've got my image, reference, and I can double click on the same picture here and it brings it in again. This time, of course, we're at a right. We're to be on the right side of the character, which means the character, we should be looking at the characters, the left side of the character, our right, the character's left, which means we should be able to look at the character's left arm, whereas right here we're seeing its right arm socket. So we need to flip this around as well. So this time, left and right in our view is the y-axis, so S to scale, Y for the y-axis, -1, enter, and it flips it around. And same thing here, we're going to check Use Alpha and take our opacity down to 0.5%. GY will allow us to move this, and this time, since the character is not symmetrical from front to back, we can just kind of eyeball it and say, okay, that looks about right there. So now if we twirl this around, you can see we've got 2 views of our character, both at about 50% opacity, and that's going to be a good guide. So let's organize this a little bit in the outliner so that we don't get lost, and so that we have an easier time not messing it up. So empty over here in the outliner, I'm going to rename that to reference-front. empty.001 is going to become reference-right. Dash right. Let's be consistent. And then I'm going to collect my whole scene collection, or click on my whole scene collection here, right click and make a new collection just for the reference images. We'll call this references, and we'll put these 2 reference images inside that collection. And that allows me to turn visibility on and off as a whole without having to click on them individually. The other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go up to my outliner filters here, and I'm going to turn on the restriction toggle for selection. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to say, hey, nothing in this collection here can be selected. So that means that I won't accidentally click on those and move them once I get things lined up. So our scene is now ready for me to start modeling this character. So from a philosophical standpoint, we're going to model this character as simply and low poly and just basic as we can, because it's really easy to add detail later, and if you start too detailed, you tend to it's really easy to model yourself into a corner and get to where you've added too much detail too quickly. So we're going to keep it as simple as we can for as long as we can. So to start off with, I'm going to add a primitive that we're going to work from, and I think looking at this guy's abdomen and torso, I think I'm going to start with a cylinder. And instead of our 32 vertex cylinder here, I am going to go to my add cylinder options before I move it or anything. This will go away once I start to manipulate the object. I'm going to change from 32 vertices to 8, and I'm going to change my cap fill type to nothing. I don't want a cap fill here. So now I'm going to just rotate this, scale it down, and then just kind of start to put this in place here. And if I alt click on the end loops there, I can sort of rotate and grab and just kind of start moving this into place to be what we need it to be. So rotate, scale, scale, maybe rotate it again. Just kind of make this so it roughly covers the territory that needs to be covered based on our drawing here. So I'll extrude this one more time down this way, and then I'll show you kind of a neat trick for closing off the end here. So if I tap E to extrude, it loads my cursor with an extrusion from these vertices that were already selected. But their position is of course arbitrary, it's just wherever I click the mouse. So in order to avoid placing these things in an arbitrary way, I'm going to tap Escape, and that opts out of the positioning portion of the extrude command. Now if I tap G to move these vertices, you can see they're still there. They're just exactly on top of 8 identically positioned vertices, which is not good for the model, but you can also see that those other vertices are not selected. So that's handy. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to tap S to scale, and I'm going to tap 0 and just scale all of these 8 vertices that I had selected into one middle position. You can see if I just select one though, these are still separate, which is a mess. That's not a good thing from a modeling standpoint. But from here I can tap A to select all, and I can either go to my vertex menu, or just the keyboard shortcut is Alt M here. Under Merge Vertices, I can say merge them by distance. And then down at the bottom of my window, you can see we removed 7 vertices, which means that where there were 8 vertices here, there's now just 1, and we have successfully closed off the end of our cylinder there. So from here, you can see that this chest piece on our model, it's kind of a separate piece, so I'm going to treat it separately, in a way separately, and I'm just kind of going to take this torso, this with the waist portion, I guess I should say, up inside where that chest piece is going to go. Okay, and from here that looks like it's about the right width. It's covering roughly the right territory, so that's basically the abdomen. Now I'm going to make this character, you don't have to do this, and there's a million ways to skin a cat, but I'm going to make this character kind of all one object. Currently it's called Cylinder, so let's rename that. The character's name is Clark, so we'll just call this Clark. And from here I'm going to Shift Alt click this next edge loop down, so I have these two sets of vertices, and I'm going to use these to make a not connected additional part of this object. And when I say not connected, I mean it's not going to share any vertices with what we have, or edges with what we have currently modeled. It's going to be unlinked in a sense. So Shift D will load my cursor with a duplicate copy of what we had selected. I'm going to hit Escape to opt out of moving that, and then just kind of scale that up to start becoming the chest piece here. And then this is probably a good time for me to start mirroring my geometry, because I don't want to have to deal with both sides. I mean, everything on the abdomen here is just kind of scaling and moving it in one axis, and it worked. But if I'm going to have both sides of this mesh coming down, there's a high possibility that I might mess up and make something that's asymmetrical, and I want to keep this symmetrical for now. So from a front view, I'm going to select everything on the character's right side, my left, and just delete all those vertices. And then in my modifier stack, I'm going to add a mirror modifier. You can see that kind of brings the geometry back over there. And I'm going to check this box that says clipping. And what clipping does is makes it so these middle vertices can't cross over that x-axis, because that's the axis we're mirroring. And there are, instead of mirroring the center vertices and making two copies of those vertices in the same position, it just considers them one vertex. That's what clipping does. One vertex. That's what clipping does. So now if I grab, let's grab this center vertex here, but if I decide, okay, I'm going to make this little kind of rib down area here, you can see that if I select one side, the other side is also following suit. It's twin on the other side. Okay, so from here I can just kind of start modeling the bottom of this sort of chest armor piece, and I can rest assured that it's perfectly symmetrical because of my mirror modifier. Okay, so let's grab those vertices and extrude them upward. There we go. And I'm going to start kind of making space for a shoulder joint here, because we know we're going to need that later. Not much later, very soon. And we'll kind of give ourselves a middle position for that shoulder. And then we'll extrude upward one more time, give ourselves sort of the top position for that. Very, very simple, rough approximation of the artwork here. And then extrude up one more time. And if I want to flatten this out perfectly, I can see the eccentricity is in the z-axis, so SZ to scale in the z-axis, 0, enter. And then that makes it perfectly flat in the z-axis, and from there I can kind of tilt it, but that gives me a straight line to work with anyway. So let's see what that looks like from a front view. From the side it looks about right. From the front it really looks quite awful. So let's fix that. So our front view, we sort of need to be excuse me. probably need to expand this guy's chest just way out. He's really quite the barrel-chested, muscular character. Okay, and probably the same thing back here. I'm going to turn my references off for just a minute so I can see this a little more clearly. You can kind of see where it's a little bit pinched in places, needs to be more rounded. Okay, and let's turn those references back on. Okay, so that's starting to get somewhere. All right. So that looks a little more like I think it should probably look, at least for starters. That's a good place to start. Let's round out that neck hole just a little bit. Kind of round the whole thing out actually a little bit more than it is even. There. Okay. So I'm reasonably happy with that, and from here I'm going to create the arms. And just a quick thought on arms. At the shoulder, your joint can really move almost 180 degrees from, pretty close to a straight down position like we've got drawn here to a kind of straight up reaching or flying or something like that. And in order for that shoulder to be able to move, one, we want to model it in a more neutral position than this drawing is showing us right now. And two, I think I'm going to treat this shoulder pad separately and just kind of hook the shoulder in there with a more bug-like appendage. This is a kind of a prime example of something that we've drawn not necessarily in two dimensions, not necessarily working in 3D. So let's start this off on a bit of a different note here. I'm going to bring that back in. We'll select our faces, and instead of extrusion, I'm going to tap I to inset this, and then we'll just kind of come in here and sort of even out these vertices to kind of make a nice hexagon. And this is probably going to look awful from a front view, but we'll fix that when we come to it. Okay, actually not as bad as I thought it would look, but we're going to take this end sort of out to match a little closer. We don't want these arms to be angled back too far. So let's kind of angle that a little better. There we go, and that'll form a little bit of a shoulder for us there too. Okay, from here I think I'm going to tap I to inset again, and then tap E to extrude. And just extrude these things outward. Now again I'm going to flatten this, so SX0. And you can see from this perspective that's pretty distorted. So we can come in here and fix that, get that looking a lot better. Okay, that's a better look. And let's also just move that whole thing forward. So GY, there we go. And I'm going to stick that out even a little farther because this actually needs to kind of penetrate we're going to construct these arms. One of the advantages of animating, say, a bug like this, or a crustacean or a robot or something, is you can have rigid parts that don't have to deform as much. So bugs have a lot of chitin on them, and we're going to take advantage of that. So I've got this end selected here. I'm going to go into face select mode, and I'm just going to duplicate this selection with Shift D, and then I'm going to kind of move this back here and scale it up, and you can kind of see what we've created here from this perspective. Just sort of bring this back in, and from this segment here we're going to form the upper arm. So we're going to extrude that out to roughly the length of our upper arm. I'm going to hit Control R to do a loop cut and slide that up a little bit, and then scale it out to kind of give us this sort of bicep muscle shape that they have in the upper arm there. And that will work for sort of our rough approximation. Again, this is simple, low poly, just kind of keeping it very basic. Since, however, there are no vertices shared between this bicep portion and the shoulder or anything else in this model, I can actually select all of this by just selecting one little part and hitting Control L. That will select everything that's linked. And then I can Shift D, duplicate that again, and scale it down to form the elbow portion there. And that looks pretty good. So once again, we'll Shift D to duplicate that again, scale it back up, and we'll make ourselves a forearm. I'm going to put a little bit of a pre-bend into it since we're going to end up rigging this character. So there's our forearm, and I'll probably even just duplicate this whole thing again to make a wrist. There's something kind of fun about having a character with big beefy muscles that has little teeny connecting joints. That incongruity is sort of fun to play with. And I'll duplicate this one more time to create a hand. We decided in class that these characters don't have thumbs, which should make them pretty easy to animate. So the hands are pretty straightforward here. I'm going to select the middle portion here and just kind of scale that up to sort of broaden the hand out, and then I'll move this in Z just a little bit to kind of give it a little bit of a hooked feel. And let's see, we'll just kind of, there we go. And I might even scale that in every axis except Z, just to kind of broaden it and make it a little more like sort of a mitten there. Okay, so that's probably pretty decent for our arms so far. They might be a little on the long side, actually I think they are, so I'm gonna Control L. Let's shrink this whole thing down and move it in X, and we'll select everything there, move it in X, Control L, shrink it down, move it back, just kind of shrink the whole thing a little bit here. Yeah. Turn off the references. That's a little better for the arms. Okay, so we've got the arms kind of simply roughed out and taken care of. Now the legs are going to be funny because this sort of strikes me as something that works in 2D but not in 3D. So I think the rounding of the abdomen here is going to get in the way of positioning the legs this way. We might have to have them a little more spread out, or we might have to dent the abdomen a little bit, but let's see what we can do here. So I think first of all we need some sort of geometry from which the hip can kind of start coming out. So I'm going to make a couple more loop cuts here to just sort of add to the level of detail on the abdomen here. Kind of try to keep things consistent. Okay, and it looks to me like we could probably have the hip come out of this joint here. So I'm going to grab this edge, Control E, or just go to your edge menu and edge slide. Will allow you to kind of move that up along the contour of the faces that are already there, so that we're not distorting things in a weird way. Okay, and now I'm going to select this face and I am going to extrude that out, and then I'm going to kind of tilt it back in toward the abdomen. You can kind of see what's going on there. And then I'm going to grab this bottom face, and this is what we're actually going to have the leg come out from. So we're going to do another inset here. And here's kind of a neat trick. If I go into vertex select mode and select these vertices, you know, if I were to just start moving these around, they would change their elevation. They'd get really weird. But if I use Shift V, the vertices will actually just move along the edges that they're already connected to, which keeps something that's flat, like the bottom of this, it stays flat basically. And that's a handy attribute to have. That's a handy tool to have in your arsenal. Okay, so from there I'm going to extrude sort of the beginning stalks for our legs, and that looks like we're starting in roughly the right direction, so I'm going to scale in Z and flatten that out, SZ0. And then from here I think I can actually once again just reuse Shift D, reuse these sections of leg a little bit, and this is where we're starting to get to where the abdomen is not working with us. We're penetrating into the abdomen just a little bit, especially if we wanted to put these legs all the way in where the legs are in the drawing. We're penetrating into the abdomen quite a bit. So let's kind of try to strike a happy medium here. We've got to dent the abdomen in a little bit to sort of, I'm going to turn off the references for this so we can see a little better. So let's GX, just sort of move this in and kind of see what things look like. And you can see that up here this is really not going to work very well. So we're going to have to also move our legs out a little bit. He's going to have a little broader stance than he did, which is fine. That actually allows us to not crush the abdomen in quite so badly. And matter of fact, let's do one more loop cut here, and that way we can kind of localize that dent a little better. We can also grab little bits of the leg and kind of, we can dent the leg as well. So okay, that seems a little more compatible than it was. Let's turn our references back on and kind of see where we're at. Okay, so I'm going to select the bottom of this leg and just kind of bring everything in here. We're just sort of making the thigh. Legs curve in funny ways. They're actually really cool ways. I really enjoy making legs just because of the shape of them. So let's we'll start there with that thigh, then we'll duplicate a little bit of a knee joint here. And again, just like the arm, we're going to put just a little bit of pre-bend in here. That's not really present in the drawing, but that's okay. A little bit of a pre-bend. We'll duplicate this and scale it up. And here's one of those fun curves. Shins tend to be pretty flat on the front, and they tend to just kind of curve back, so that's kind of a cool thing. And they tend to curve a little bit more to the inside than they do to the outside. Really neat shape. And I'm going to taper that ankle a little bit better and just kind of put that there. There we go. Okay, finally we're going to make a little ankle joint, maybe even smaller. And then I think I'm going to use one of the hands to make the feet. Feet should splay out just a little, and I always like feet that look nice and stable, so I'm going to grab more vertices than would usually be flat on the ground here, and also these back two, but not these two. Then I'm gonna SZ0, scale those in the Z-axis by a factor of 0 and just really flatten those feet out. And I'll pick the fronts up just a little. Okay. Now we probably don't need quite that much arch in the feet, and they probably don't need to be that long either. Probably scale the whole thing down actually a little bit. And feet kind of have a cool shape as well. I'm going to put a loop cut right in the middle of these and just sort of move them out just a bit. Probably take these back ends up just a bit. Okay, there we go. That's pretty decent for feet. I actually quite like those feet. Okay, so references off for a second. Let's just have a look and see how this is working. So far, so good. Okay, that brings us to the head. Now the head is kind of its own topic, because to rig a head properly, first of all, this one's a little off center compared to the rest of the body, but to rig a head properly, the eyes need to be surrounded by loops and the mouth needs to be surrounded by loops, so that when you rig the face and it distorts properly. So we're going to have to deal with that at this time. So I'm going to again tab into edit mode. The head's going to be part of the same object, the same master object, and I'm going to start creating this head from a new object, but it's again going to be a cylinder. So Shift A, create a cylinder, and again with 8 vertices and no cap fill. And I'm going to scale this down, but there's going to be something weird going on with this cylinder, and that is that it's currently mirrored, because this whole object is mirrored, and also it's clipping in the center. So if I try to move it out from the center, you can see those center vertices don't let go of each other, which is what clipping's designed to do. So I'm going to move this up in the Z-axis, and currently this cylinder is duplicated over the top of itself. Since it's centered, I don't need to turn off clipping to do this, but I need to delete everything that's on one side of my mirror axis. So select those vertices and delete them, and you can see that the cylinder remains visible, but I only have active vertices on the middle and on the same side as I've been modeling on. So there's kind of the beginnings of our head. Let's scale that down and sort of put it into position there. Okay, I'm going to grab the bottom vertices here and extrude and scale, and we're kind of going to build kind of going to build a neck joint. We'll extrude again and scale and extrude and scale. We'll just kind of see what that looks like. And from front to back, that's not fitting at all. From side to side, it looks like it's actually doing okay. Probably could fit a little better. There we go. But let's fix that from front to back. Control L, scale in Y. Let's kind of bring it in here a little bit. And let's bring this whole thing up and scale it in the Y-axis. Bring that in. Okay, let's see what that looks like, and that's looking a little better. That's looking like it will probably fit more appropriately. Okay, I'm going to bring the top of this head down because we don't necessarily want to model the hair yet. That'll be for a later date. Okay, so we've got our head kind of roughly in place here, and again, we're going to work on the eyes first. So the eyes need to be loops. So this will not create those loops, but I'm going to create some space for those loops by creating a loop cut. So Control R and put a loop cut above where the eyes go, Control R, a loop cut below where the eyes go, and Control R, a loop cut right through the middle of the eyes. And I'm going to just delete this vertex here. So delete that vertex, and then you can kind of see what that looks like from our perspective here. We still have this vertex and the edges that accompany it right in the center, but there's nothing here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 vertices surrounding this hole where we need to put the eye loop. And that's an important thing to remember, those 8 vertices, because now I'm going to create the loop for the eye out of a circle. So go to your Add menu or hit Shift A and create a circle. And again, because this circle is part of the same object, it's mirrored on top of itself here, and currently has 32 vertices, but remember I need 8 vertices on this thing and no fill type. So let's scale that down a little bit, and then I need to turn off clipping because this loop, I need 2 of them, and I need them to be on either side of the axis here. So there are my loops. Scale them down and bring them up and kind of start to put them in position for the eyes. Okay, and that's probably good, and this is going to look horrible before it looks better. That's kind of a good rule of thumb for these things. So I can turn clipping back on now that I've got these separated, and with it selected I'm going to create the first loop of the eyes by tapping E to extrude and S to scale, and we'll just scale out from there. And that's plenty. We just need a little bit of a loop of faces there. So now I'm going to go to Edge Select mode, and I'm going to select. We'll turn off the references for this part so it's a little easier to see what I'm doing. We'll select these 2 edges and tap F to bridge them with a face. Now select these 3, F, and so on. So on through the entire model until we have joined these eye loops with the rest of the geometry of this kind of face canister we've got going here. So there are our eye loops. And the other thing I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to close off the top of the head. So in vertex select mode, I'm going to select the front center vertex and the rear center vertex, and then tap F. Since there's only two vertices selected, instead of making a face, that makes an edge. I can then right click on it and subdivide, and from here I have all the edges that I need to just create faces, creating quads rather than triangles, and that allows me to kind of approximate the shape of this character a little better. I can start to sort of curve the head around a little bit. Gonna try to give him a hint of a jaw shape. Okay, speaking of jaw, let's make the mouth. So the next thing we need to do is the mouth also needs to be surrounded by loops. So Control R, I'm going to do a loop cut to kind of create space for the mouth here, and then I'm going to, since there's only one mouth and it's centered rather than two eyes that are symmetrically arranged, I'm going to delete the center vertex of this mouth cut that I just made, and that leaves me again 8 vertices to kind of attach to. So from here I'm going to make another circle, and again with 8 vertices, and it's again mirrored as it was before. So rotate this up and kind of scale it down and sort of start to get it into position, but I again need to come in here and delete all of one side of my circle. So kind of put that into position, and then same thing, tap E to extrude and S to scale, and that just sort of gives us the beginnings of the mouth. And from there I can start joining edges into faces. Okay, and that one goes pretty quickly. So this looks truly awful. As I said it would. It's got to look that way before it gets better. So from here, one of the things that we can sort of do to immediately improve the mouth is we can start curving it around the face a little bit. You know, thinking in 3D. So let's GY and just start taking vertices back and kind of giving the mouth a little bit of a curve to it. Okay, and that still doesn't look good, obviously, but it doesn't look awful in that sort of I have a straw for a mouth way. Okay, so from here now we can kind of start to get a little more earnest in our construction of the face. I'm not going to lean the face back quite as far as it's leaning back in this drawing. I'm going to again kind of go for a bit more of a neutral position. So the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to end up closing the mouth, by the way, because it's much easier to sort of rig a mouth that closes properly if it starts closed, if its rest position is closed. So looking ahead, we're going to actually close the mouth rather than open it like it's open in our concept art here. But until we get to that point, we are going to actually work on the entire body for a moment. Let's kind of see if we can unsquare this head a little bit first. Unsquare my head. Okay, and these eye loops could certainly go a little more toward the center. Okay, that's good. So the next item that we're going to deal with, let's turn the references off for this. Let's tab into object mode, and under the object menu I'm going to change this from flat shaded to shade smooth. Okay, and if you get a bunch of weird artifacts around the eyes, I did not this time, but sometimes you might get a bunch of weird artifacts around the eyes or something else that you bridged, that you connected with faces. You can just tab back into edit mode, select everything, and go to your mesh menu and click on normals and recalculate outside, and that will take care of the problem, because sometimes you may have connected something with its normals backwards from what you thought they were. Okay, so this is smooth shaded now, so let's add a subdivision surface modifier, and that's going to smooth everything out a bit more, and just kind of, it really kind of takes some of the character that we've been kind of trying to push into this thing away. You know, the chest isn't quite so puffed out. Everything just becomes a little bit smooth and kind of inoffensive in a sort of offensive way. But now we can turn our references back on and tab into edit mode. You can see where our vertices were originally placed, and if I turn this on cage button down here on, then it shows us where the vertices are being positioned by the modifier. So that allows me to just kind of come in here and sort of shape, kind of reassert where I want this thing to be occupying space. And it's pretty easy to sort of get that character that we had going, or that at least we were starting to have. It's kind of easy to get that back this way. So let's kind of sculpt this character a little bit better. Just kind of push these vertices around and get this looking a little more like we want it. Okay, and let's see, our abdomen here shrunk way down with that subdivision surface modifier, so let's kind of reassert the size of that. Again, Alt-click allows you to select an entire edge loop, which is a wonderful tool. Okay, and that, scale that down in the y-axis. There we go. Okay, that's looking a little better. So the other thing that we need to do, I'm going to turn off references for this, where we had kind of sharp transitions between, you know, these chitinous joints and everything. We now have just kind of these smooth, sort of marshmallowy looking areas, which aren't great. So we need to do additional loop cuts to kind of to lessen the area of arc between vertices. So, and that's really what the subdivision surface modifier does, is it takes, maybe if you've got 3 vertices making a corner, you know, it just kind of draws an arc between them. And so we are going to lessen that distance to kind of shrink those arcs down. So what I like to do is take these things as far as they'll go and then back off just a little bit, so that I'm not actually creating overlapping edges in my base mesh, which, I mean, if you turn this modifier off, you can see there's a little bit of different distance between those new loop cuts that I made. I don't want them exactly on top of each other. Okay, and just kind of back that off just a little after going all the way, and same thing here, all the way out and then back off, all the way out and then back off. We're going to do this for all of our joints, and this is a situation where our mirror modifier, whoops, accidentally did 2 loop cuts there. Our mirror modifier is really just worth its salt. It saves us so much time and effort because this is just kind of repetitive stuff that a computer should be handling for us, and so it is. We only have to do it on one side instead of both sides. And on the tip of the hand, I'm not going to go all the way to the end. I'm going to try to keep that rounded out like a mitten, kind of. So that looks a little better. And now let's do the same things to the hips and the legs. Now the shins. And the shins are one I want to look at. I want to make sure that I've still kind of got that curvature of the shin the way we wanted it. I think we could exaggerate that a little better. For some reason, the curvature of a shin just makes a character's stance seem very dynamic, but also kind of solid, if that makes sense. So I really like trying to get that right. Let's get the feet. Okay. And that, if we turn our references off, that looks a little better. Still not great, but we're getting there. We're getting somewhere. Okay, so let's put eyeballs into this character now. And that's going to make things a little odd. Right now the eyeballs should fit in properly because our eye sockets are perfectly circular. So if again, I'm tabbed into edit mode here, and if I create an eyeball, I'm going to create a UV sphere. Oh, that was a circle. If I create a UV sphere, then it's mirrored and clipped again. So I've got this same old kind of issue. So I need to uncheck clipping and move these things to either side, and then I can shrink them down to be the right size for eyeballs and turn clipping back on. Okay, the other thing I'm going to do, because eventually we're going to want to make irises in this thing, is I'm going to take this top triangle fan and I'm going to turn it forward so that it can become the irises for our character. Okay, so if we kind of start moving this thing around, it starts to fit properly, although it just doesn't look very good, right? Because it's very kind of bulbous, and they just kind of stick out in a not pleasing sort of way. But we can start there. So one other thing about eyes, they usually don't line up perfectly. They're not going to stare in parallel and look proper. So we kind of want to splay them just a little bit until we feel like, okay, yeah, now the character's looking at me. And now with the eyes selected, I'm going to tap H to hide them. And I'm going to turn my reference images back on. And I'm going to kind of start shaping the eye socket to conform a little more to the eye shape here. And this is going to throw off our fit, the way the eyes fit completely. That's okay. It's kind of a necessary step. We have to do this, and we'll also find that again, things that work in 2D won't work quite the same in 3D. So we'll have to reshape this eye and kind of reconsider. We'll try to get it, reasonably close to the shape as designed here, but we're going to have to make some compromises on that before the end, I guarantee it. Okay, so we're kind of starting to fit a little bit there. So let's work on getting these edge vertices all visible. Okay. Okay, that's actually pretty close, and I'll be honest with you, it usually takes a lot longer than this seems to be taking this time. Let's see. Maybe I'll manage to mess things up in a good way here so that it takes longer for me now, but so far this is actually going pretty well. Also, just a thought, our original art here has the character's eyes pretty wide open, and we don't really want to have our rest pose be an extreme position for the eyelids. We want the eyelids to kind of be halfway between extremes, so not wide open, not super closed. And that's just so that they can distort either way without having to, or they can deform either way without having to do a massive deform when we rig the character's face. This is also a good time to kind of start building in a bit of a brow. Sort of start getting our character's face to kind of work a little better in 3D. Okay, so that's kind of getting somewhere, and again, this is basically just an exercise to sort of get our base mesh in place. So we're not going to go full on character development and really give this guy like a super large personality or anything like that, but whoop. But we'll try to make him at least have some appeal. Okay. Actually, I'm going to bring these top eyelids down just a little bit more as well, just kind of neutral, a more neutral pose. Okay, now from here I'm going to hide the eyeballs, and I'm going to select the loops of the eyes, and we're going to just kind of give them a little bit of thickness and substance here by tapping E to extrude and scaling them down just a touch, then E to extrude and scaling them up, and then moving them back just a touch, and then E to extrude and scaling them up and back a little bit. And this gives us basically just kind of this edge here. which is sort of nice. It gives us a little bit of thickness there, and we can broaden that or thin it out, you know, as needed. Okay, and now if we Alt-H to bring our eyeballs back in, we've got a little bit of a clip going on here, but that kind of works, and that thickness gives us a little more versatility, a little more area where we can actually look and see, like, okay, you know, those eyes belong in those sockets. We need to do essentially the same thing to the mouth. The mouth, again, we probably need to model that closed rather than open. So we're going to Alt-click to select the entire loop there and do kind of the same thing that we did to add thickness to the eyelids. So we'll add thickness to the lips here, extrude and scale it down just a little, extrude and move it back. And then extrude, extrude and scale it up. Kind of move it back and scale it in the Z-axis there. And this is where we really kind of have to start sort of moving it around manually, because it's such an odd shape. Okay, and now we can extrude and scale the whole thing and just kind of bring it back, and we're going to form the inside of the mouth this way. Extrude, scale, and now I'm going to come in here and just hide the back of the head and the eyeballs, basically just kind of a bunch of this geometry that's currently in the way. And then we'll come in here, turn the references off, and we will start to close this shape off, close off the shape of the mouth. So we don't need the mouth to go quite that wide. And we're going to give this guy a little bit of a throat, just in case anybody ever looks down his throat. And so we'll extrude and scale and start to scale that down and bring it back in the y-axis, scale it in x, and then from here we can just treat it the same way we did the top of the head. F, and then subdivide that edge and add a couple of faces. And in face select mode, we can select these two faces. Let's turn everything back on so we can kind of see where we're at. Up. And then I'm going to extrude, and we can just kind of start moving this whole thing back. Oops. And our clipping caught up with us there. Created a bit of a problem. So extrude, and let's scale that in y by 0 so it doesn't kind of curve in on itself. Okay, and that's pretty decent for a throat. It's too far back, so let's kind of move the whole thing forward. Okay, and that's probably farther down his throat than anybody's ever going to need to look. And So now he's got an inside to his mouth. And that will basically form a base mesh for us. Well, one other thing. Let's also make him a tongue. He's not going to have teeth because he's a bug, but let's just extrude a tongue out for him. Kind of flatten this thing out. Okay. And that just gives him a little bit of a tongue in there if we ever need to animate that. Okay, so that gives us kind of our bug base mesh, and that should be a pretty good starting point for creating the rest of our bug characters. I hope this has been helpful. Thanks.